Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today, Why Workplace Wellbeing is Key to Company Performance. My name is Kat Duco, and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. I work alongside a team of key account managers to support our customers across the Asia-Pacific region. We've had a great response to our webinars this year, and this one's no exception. We've had over 1,000 registrants. We do want this to be an interactive webinar, and I'll be assisting with questions and comments throughout. So to participate, please use the questions box feature on your GoToWebinar side panel. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Myers-Briggs Company, we're a mission-driven global organization with a 60-year history, and our mission is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. We deliver on our mission by working with organizations of all sizes and from all industry sectors to design and deliver development programs relating to teams, leadership, organizational development, coaching, and selection. And we have a range of assessments to help you achieve multiple business objectives for the entire talent lifecycle, from selecting the right talent, developing your people to enhance performance, and supporting career transitions. Our presenter today is Dr. Martin Bolt, Senior Director of Professional Services and Psychologist at the Myers-Briggs Company. Martin's role is pivotal in helping people respond to ever-changing work environments. He has experience partnering with organizations to help people apply insights from research to areas including leadership development, executive coaching, team effectiveness, organizational change, virtual training solutions, and workplace well-being. And he's also our lead assessment certification trainer. During this webinar, Martin will share the results of our multi-year global study and provide strategies for enhancing workplace well-being. And with that, I will turn you over to Martin.
Thank you, Kat. And I will just try my camera just so everyone knows that there's a real person speaking to you and we're in real time here. So first of all, thanks, Kat, for opening the session and welcome. I should say good afternoon, good morning. I'm not sure whether we've got anyone joining us in the evening, but if you are, fantastic. And really great that we've got, again, a really positive response to this topic today on well-being. I won't leave my camera on the whole session because it can get distracting, but just wanted everyone to let you know that there is a real person here as I guide us through the session today. And as Kat mentioned, I guess the purpose of our organisation is a good place to start to help people lead more inspiring and productive and fulfilling lives. And that's a lot about what today's session on wellbeing really focuses in on. It is, in fact, a real keen area of interest for me and has been for the last 6 years of research that I've done in this area, which I'm really excited to be sharing much of it today with you because there's a good length of time behind it. And in particular, I guess it has particular relevance for the point in time where we find all of ourselves in a world of work and living environment that's a bit different due to what's happened in the last 2 years or 18 months to 2 years with the pandemic. But probably just to give more of a sweeping historical perspective on this, the idea of well-being and its many different forms or versions of it really dates back way into the early stages of recorded history. And if we really start back in a time with 480 BC or 400 BC with Buddha, Buddha talked a lot about we are what we think, and that who we are or what we experience really arises from our thoughts. So Buddha probably was characterizing our well-being as coming from what we are thinking. Aristotle, again a bit later on, proposed that the ultimate purpose in life was to lead the good life, which he described around the golden mean of virtues. Thomas Jefferson in the 1700s, as president, helped build into the Declaration of Independence in the United States the right to the pursuit of happiness. So it's become part of the political landscape and cultural landscape there in the US. In more modern times, in the post-World War era, a psychologist, Abraham Maslow, talked a lot about human needs and how people work throughout their lives to reaching a state of self-actualization, which would have been, I guess, a way of describing well-being. And in more recent times, researchers and psychologists like Professor Martin Seligman have really brought to the fore through research and latest thinking of what is well-being. So today, I guess I wanted to acknowledge that probably what I'm sharing with you stems from the shoulders of giants, of people who've come before us, who've really helped us get our head around what we mean by well-being. And finding ways to improve well-being is likely to have been a goal throughout human history, but obviously there have been different historical factors that have impacted our well-being. And for the majority of the last 200,000 years that modern human beings have been around, our well-being was constantly threatened by challenges such as lack of food and famine, diseases that would run through human populations, and violence and wars were the main concerns of human beings for much of human history. Now, in the last 150 years, different threats have really emerged around our well-being. And the threats include things such as, dying or being unwell from obesity. We're more likely to die of old age rather than disease. And unfortunately, mental health and even suicide is a big contributor to people's shortened lives, or in fact, impacting on their well-being. So I guess what I'm highlighting is that well-being has always had challenges, but we're probably facing some different challenges in the modern era to our well-being than what much of human history would have had to deal with. And probably bring it right back to the current moment. Since the COVID pandemic, for the first time in a long time, people around the world are facing a common challenge to our well-being. And I know, just looking at some of the images on the screen here, I've felt all the emotions of all these people on the screen at some point in the last 18 months. And I'm well aware that a number of the changes and uncertainty and frustrations that we've all had to go through, it's certainly taken its toll at times on my own well-being, and even other people in my life where I've seen their well-being probably not hitting the thriving level, but potentially in more of a survival level. So to thrive, we need to consider our overall well-being. And today I'll be talking about, in particular, our psychological well-being, and how in particular relates to our experiences at work. But our well-being and wellness is interconnected or related. So our overall physical health is very much tied into our psychological health, as our psychological health also affects our wellness. We do know that when people have positive well-being from a physical and psychological perspective, it has benefits in other places, such as how engaged people are, particularly in their work. And we also know that engagement, feel engaged at work, also funnels back to boosting well-being. So there's like a feedback loop and a virtuous circle. And there's a lot of evidence that the higher well-being means better performance, particularly in the workplace. And research now, and a growing body, suggests that up to a third of performance at work may be in fact due to well-being. When people have a good day at work, they're more productive, they're more creative, and they're more likely to recommend the place that they're working as a good place to work. So it's not insignificant that well-being plays a part in our life, obviously in and outside of work. But I guess today we'll be focusing very much in on what does well-being look like in the workplace, and what are some of the actual influences or levers to positive well-being, and also what organizations can expect as some outcomes to well-being as well. Now, as Kat mentioned, we do want to involve you in our session today. And again, here's an opportunity to participate. We're going to launch a poll, and just to get a sense of where people are experiencing your well-being today in this moment. I should highlight that it's an anonymous poll. So what we're really inviting you just to share with us now is, how are you feeling today? And there's a bit of a rating scale from blah right through to feeling great. So take a moment just to vote your response, and then once we see what people have shared. It will give us a sense of where people might be on the wellbeing dimension in today's session. So, Kat, how are the responses looking? Are we getting some responses coming in?
Yes, we got a lot of responses coming in now. So I'll go ahead and close the poll because we're almost at full participation here.
Sure.
Share the results. So yeah, good news is not too many people are blah. We've got
Great.
most in average and doing good, with the majority in the doing good section.
Okay, excellent. So thank you for sharing that. And I think what that highlights, the doing good, I guess, on that scale is above the middle, but not at the top end. And that probably ties back to some of the research that I'll share with you shortly of where a lot of people experience their wellbeing. But we can obviously consider there are people at all ends of the spectrum. So in fact, we did have some people who weren't feeling great about their wellbeing today, and some people who are feeling really positive. The good news is there is a number of things we can do to shift our well-being, and I'll talk to those as we go through the session. But here's another opportunity just for everyone to reflect on some questions and how they relate to you and your own experience. And as we go through questions, I won't ask you to necessarily think of an answer for all of them, but maybe think which one or two of the questions is most impactful or really resonates with you. So first of all, think of the last situation you felt sustained positive emotion at work. That could be joy or cheerfulness or happiness or just amusement. And how did that positive emotion affect your actual approach to work? Or think of a person you have a positive relationship at work. What is it about that relationship that makes it positive for you? Think of a time when you thoroughly enjoyed a work activity that used your strengths or talents or really engaged your interests. What was that like for you when you were undertaking that work activity? Or think of a role or an activity you undertake at work that gives you a sense of meaning or purpose. It helps you feel more connected to others, or in some way maybe supporting or helping other people. How does that actually help you at work? And think of something you do that gives you a sense of achievement at work, where you feel like you're progressing. How does that achievement make you feel towards your experiences at work? And finally, when did you last feel a strong negative emotion? It could have been a feeling of anger or feeling down or depressed about something, or anxious or even dejected. And what effect did that negative emotion have on you? So these are just some questions to reflect about your own experiences of work. And why am I asking you these questions? Well, each one of those questions maps onto a different aspect of well-being, what I would refer to as one of the well-being factors. Our well-being is not one thing. And I often hear the phrase, how happy are people? Happiness is one component or element of the overall picture of psychological well-being. And over the last 6 years, we created a model of well-being, building on previous work of other well-being researchers. And here on screen are the key factors or the key components that comprise the well-being framework that we're looking at. And I should say, this is the research behind this is in a article that we've published, and it'll be one of the articles that everyone joining the webinar today will get a copy of and will have access to. So what are the factors and how do they relate to the questions? Well, here are the questions I just presented to everyone and how they relate to each of the wellbeing factors. So the first one, positive emotions, is about that sustained positive emotional experience. You can see relationships relates to positive relationships at work. Engagement was where we're thoroughly enjoying an activity. Meaning is where we're finding purpose or meaning in what we're doing. Accomplishment is how we actually experience achievement in our work. And the frequency, how often we encounter negative emotions. So just to go a bit further with each one of those elements of well-being, positive emotions are how often we experience an emotion such as happiness, pleasure, or satisfaction in our daily work. And of course, it's unrealistic to expect that we would experience them all the time, every single day. So it's more, in our research, we ask people over the course of a week, how often did you experience these emotions? When we're talking about engagement, it's a deep psychological connection or feeling absorbed and interested in something that we're doing. It could be a work activity, a cause, or even just being part of an organization. The highest level of engagement was described as flow, which is when a person is totally immersed and concentrating in a positive way on a task that they find motivating. A lot of people describe being in flow states when they're playing music or when they're engaged in a sporting activity. It's often referred to as being in the zone. A lot of people who program in the programming world with computers will talk about feeling in the zone or high levels of engagement with the programming activity. And when we're engaged, it requires using our skills and talents and really stretching them, but in a pleasant way. And I'm sure we've come across lots of research in the past about levels of engagement at work, but maybe think about how engaged are you with your work activities, or how engaged are the people in your business or organization. Positive relationships is a key component of well-being as well, and it reflects relationships where there's mutual feelings of caring, support, satisfaction. So we give and take in those relationships. Now, it can be at an individual level, it can even be at a community level or a team level. And people with positive relationships in the research have been found to experience less mental illness, better physical health, and in fact, longer lifespans. And on the work front, Gallup research indicated that employees who have a best friend or someone that they can describe as a friend at work are more likely to be engaged in their jobs, and more likely as a result to have customers or clients of their business more engaged. So it's not an insignificant element of well-being at work. When we look at meaning, probably one useful way of understanding it is through a description of the philosopher Nietzsche, who said, "If I have a why to live, you can bear almost any how." So a meaningful life can be extremely satisfying even when we're facing hardship or challenges, whereas a meaningless life, a life where we don't have purpose or meaning, would actually be quite an ordeal if we had to encounter a hardship or a challenge. And meaning involves having a sense of purpose and direction, but in some way being connected to something bigger, being connected to a group of people and how what we do helps or is meaningful for them, or indeed how we help a wider community or a wider group of people in life. So lives are meaningful when our lives actually matter to someone or for something that we're doing. And meaning is something that's pretty crucial to human existence. People have evolved to seek meaning in a way to probably transcend monotony or adversity that we all face through life. And examples of that is research shows that people who are parents report more incidences of drudgery than joy when they're parenting. However, they also report that their children are one of the key sources of happiness in life. So meaning becomes an important part of that. And our research also found that accomplishment is also a key element of well-being. So accomplishment is where a person is pursuing something for the sake of progressing or mastery, regardless of whether it brings positive emotions or engagement. And activities we seek to achieve without coercion from others is an example where accomplishment would be a boost for our well-being. It's probably examples include where we want to engage in something and do it really well or succeed in it just for the sake of succeeding, not because it brings some sort of financial reward or some other incentive. And research by Duckworth and colleagues found that having a mindset where people are driven to achieve something is actually being found as twice as important to academic performance, even more important than actual intellectual level. The other thing we found in our research is, whilst it's important to ask about positive emotions, through the responses over the 6 years, we found that there's a sub-element of how often do people experience negative emotions. Now, positive emotions not necessarily the opposite to a negative emotion. Yes, it is where we might feel anxious or sad or pessimistic about something, but negative emotions are a warning sign, and in fact, they do serve a purpose in life. It's not like we can eliminate them, nor should we eliminate them. But what we found is the more frequent or more sustained a negative emotion is, the more likely it's going to have a negative impact on someone's well-being. So there are the elements that we've identified, the 6 elements as part of our well-being model, which we refer to as Preman. And maybe for yourselves, you can consider out of those 6 elements, where would you see yourself today on a 1 to 10 scale? A score of 1, meaning that you're not really experiencing those elements frequently or often, through to a score of 10, you'll be experiencing it regularly. So this gives you a bit of background as to how we put together a measure of well-being. And in actual fact, we focus very much on workplace well-being. What are people's experiences of their well-being when they're in the workplace? And over the last 6 years, we've refined and built a brief measure of workplace well-being called the Global Wellbeing at Work Inventory. It comprises 28 questions. And what I'm sharing with you here is just a sample of some of the analysis that we've put together, which is really showing that questions measuring each one of those 6 elements were highly consistent and highly reliable. So who's been part of our wellbeing research in the last 6 years? Well, first of all, we have over 19,000 people who volunteered and participated in our research, which was fantastic. And in fact, it's been one of the most participated research initiatives that we've undertaken in recent years. So the timeline spanned from 2016 to this year. You can see we got a very high percentage of women participating, and the age ranges were from 18 to 86, but we also had an average range of 43 years of age. I should say that our research has been undertaken internationally, so we have people from over 87 different countries who participated in this research at some point. So what does wellbeing look like in 2021? So a reminder here that people were measuring it on a 10-point scale, 10 being positive experiences of wellbeing with the exception of negative emotion, which I'll talk about, and 1 being low experiences of it. So the first measure you can see, or the first reported results, overall wellbeing is bringing all of those elements together into one wellbeing outcome. And you can see a score of 7.1. So as we invited you to participate in our poll today, you could see a lot of people were putting themselves in that category of doing okay. And that kind of fits very well with that range of about scores of 7. But as you look across the graph, you can actually start to see the different elements of wellbeing. And over the 6 years, what we found is the part of wellbeing that is consistently rated very high is relationships, which is really telling us that relationships are an important part of workplace wellbeing. You can also see meaning and accomplishment feature there. And positive emotions is something that contributes to wellbeing, but it's probably an area that there's an opportunity to do more work on, or finding ways in the workplace where people can experience positive emotions more frequently. Now you can see the score at the end of negative emotion 4.3. That's kind of where we want it. The lower the frequency of negative emotions, the better. So it's the only score where you want a low score out of those elements. So that's what wellbeing looks like in 2021. We were fortunate enough to have previous years of wellbeing research where we could compare 2021 to previous years. So this is the overall wellbeing measure, the average score for each year. And you can see in 2016, it started off very positively. It's remained very consistent throughout the last 6 years as an overall wellbeing score. But it goes without saying that 2021, you can see there's a slight dip in well-being overall. Of course, there are probably many reasons, but one of the most common or salient reasons is obviously the current challenges we've all been experiencing as the COVID pandemic and the effects of it have continued to roll through the population. It's probably worth noting that our 2020 survey was conducted in 2 times last year between March and September. And you can actually see in 2020, wellbeing seemed to hold up reasonably well in comparison to previous years. Now, in our part of the world, Australia, here's a picture of the wellbeing outcomes from 2016 to 2021. There's a lot of data on this screen, so I'm not expecting everyone to analyze every single element, but the blue bar at the beginning of each group of results in each year is the overall wellbeing score. So that's something that you could potentially compare across the different years. And you can actually see that 2016 was close to a score of 8, and the year that it really peaked at a high overall was in 2019, that Australians reported wellbeing slightly more positive than the other years. Now, when we get to 2021, overall wellbeing has moved or declined in comparison to previous years. You can still see that the sub-elements, things like engagement and meaning, are still holding up quite well. But what also struck us is in 2021, there has been an increase in negative emotions. Again, probably no surprise, but it's almost like a bit of a warning light that there is clear signs people are experiencing more or a higher frequency of negative feelings in their workplace experiences. So what are some of the key insights that we're getting from the last 6 years of wellbeing research? First of all, women report slightly higher wellbeing overall compared to men. And although it was slight, it was statistically significant. There was a real difference between men and women. We also compared different age groups from 18 to over 65s. And the overall pattern is that as age groups increased, so did wellbeing, such that the plus 65 age group had the most positive wellbeing in the workplace. There's probably no surprise with that as it relates to previous research about age and wellbeing and things like people finding meaning or reporting finding more meaning and positive relationships as they go through life could be big contributors to that higher wellbeing results with the older age groups. But it also highlights the point that there's probably more to be done and more opportunities to support people in the younger age groups, particularly those entering the workforce. And we also found when we compared across different job categories that people involved in knowledge work, what we might have traditionally called white collar work, reported higher levels of wellbeing than people in more manual work. And just to give a summary of this, here are the 3 occupational categories in our research that reported the highest levels of wellbeing. You can see they fall in education, healthcare, and management. And then we extracted the 3 lowest groups, and that includes production, building and cleaning and maintenance, and food preparation. I guess what's interesting there is if you look at the top 3 and the bottom 3, between management and production occupations on the scale, there's not huge differences. But in actual fact, from the highest reporting occupational category, the education group, to the lowest, the food preparation group, that was statistically significantly different. So there is real differences in wellbeing between people in those occupational groups. And that, I guess, again, is a further call out that what are the things that we could do, particularly for the groups that have relatively lower wellbeing occupationally, what are the things that could turn that around or lift it for people in those groups so that they might experience a more similar level of wellbeing to those in the high levels. We also, over the last few years, have paid particular attention to what are the benefits of wellbeing, not just for people at work, but also the places where they're working, their businesses. And this came about from looking at what are some common challenges that particularly those of us involved in leading people management or in the HR space are trying to address in the workplace as outcomes. So it's probably with no surprise that when we looked at correlations between well-being and workplace outcomes, the higher a person's well-being, the more likely they are to report satisfaction with their direct manager who was supervising them, that they also are more likely to report that they got support from their manager and they had overall higher levels of satisfaction with their work. People who reported lower levels of well-being were more likely to report that they experienced stress in their work relationships, more likely to report that they had a tougher workload, and more likely to experience or report feelings of burnout. So the higher your well-being, the less likely you experience stress and burnout. And on organisational outcomes, we ask people to report on a range of behaviours or, in fact, attitudes and perspectives. You can see in the green boxes, as people reported higher levels of well-being, they're more likely to feel emotionally attached to their organisation, go out of their way to do things to help colleagues, have a sense of commitment to the organisation, and also do things that help the organisation in a broader way, what is called organisational citizenship behaviours. People who reported high well-being were less likely to feel like they were obliged to stay in their organisation. They weren't searching for a job somewhere else, and they had a low intention to leave the organisation. So essentially, the higher a person's well-being, the more likely they'll be engaged with the organisation and less likely to want to leave it. So these are not insignificant outcomes, because many of those organisational behaviours have also been found to relate to or correlate with organisational performance, both financial and other performance outcomes. In recent years, and in particularly last year and this year, we turned our attention to, does well-being relate to other important aspects of the world of work? And I'm pleased to share with you today, for the first time, we haven't had a chance to release these results until today, that we looked closely at inclusion in the workplace and also the kind of mindset that people have when they're at work. So we've been doing a lot of work recently on inclusive leadership, what that is and what's its effect in the workplace. And what we found from that research is that there are 8 core competencies that leaders can develop and need to demonstrate in order to be experienced by their followers as inclusive leaders. And for those who want to know more about this, we actually did a webinar on inclusive leadership and its impact on the workplace in September. And that's a webinar that's freely available for anyone to look at. But we go further into what is inclusive leadership and what are the benefits for leaders, the people they lead, and organisations. Now, when we looked at it from a wellbeing perspective, and we asked people to rate their leader on inclusion and also rate their own wellbeing, what we found is the more staff feel included by their manager or leader, the higher their reported wellbeing. And the elements of inclusive leadership that were particularly prominent were behaviours such as people feeling heard and understood by their manager, excuse me, mistakes and opportunities that they make, mistakes they make are seen as more opportunities for learning and growth by their manager, that their manager focuses on what they did right and not what they only got wrong, Their manager seeks others' perspectives, including their own, when making decisions. And we had an overall inclusive leadership metric, and that was highly correlated with well-being of employees as well. So what does that mean for people in leadership roles? There is a relationship between how leaders lead people and the well-being of the people that they're leading. Now, of course, being an inclusive leader is not something that's a given, or it's not an automatic set of skills that all leaders have. So as I mentioned in our previous webinar around inclusive leadership, we look at ways that leaders can develop, and in particular, some approaches that we've been providing to organizations about building that inclusive leadership capability. When it comes to mindset, this has been an important area of learning and a topic that's made its way through many organizations as an important part of how people engage with learning and challenging contexts. And it comes from some original research by a psychologist, Carol Dweck. In a nutshell, she identified that mindsets have an important part to play in how any one of us approaches learning and achievement. Dweck described a mindset as a mental framework that guides how people think, feel, and act when they're trying to achieve something. Now, for those you may have come across Dweck's work, you'll be aware that she describes there are fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. And for all of us, we tend to have a bit of both, and it does exist on a continuum. But there are clear distinctions when people consistently have a fixed mindset and when people consistently have a growth mindset. When we're looking at a fixed mindset, it's where people have a belief that their talents are innate or inborn, and for the most part, they're kind of born with it or they're not. The description of that would be when someone says this person is naturally smart or naturally good at that particular skill or activity. If someone has a growth mindset, they have a view or a belief that talents can be developed, and that takes effort and practice and extra learning and training. So although someone may not be well skilled or effective at a particular capability, through effort and hard work, they can improve on it. So what does that mean when people were asked about their mindsets, and how did that relate to well-being? So what we found was when people had a belief or were agreeing with statements around a growth mindset, such as anyone can improve their skills with practice, or to be better at something, you must work hard at it, or everyone can improve what they're currently doing, the majority of people who supported and agreed with those statements also were more likely to have high levels of well-being. And you can see the correlation result there on the screen. We're also interested in people who agreed with or endorsed more fixed mindset views. So that would be people who agree to the statements such as intelligence is what you're born with and cannot be changed, or you need natural ability to develop a talent, or even if you learn new things, you cannot change your intelligence. So people who tended to agree with those statements were more likely to report lower levels of well-being. So there's something interesting going on there between the mindset we have and the well-being or level of well-being we experience at work. And a reminder, all these questions were framed around our experiences at work. It's quite possible that people have different mindsets for different things outside of work, and indeed what happens to our well-being may be influenced also by our experiences outside of work. But what I found interesting here is there's something going on between mindsets and well-being, and this is an area that we're going to continue exploring. So the story so far. The average well-being overall, as you can see for previous years, has remained moderately high until we got to 2021. So this is the first time in 6 years where we've seen a drop in wellbeing for many people. It's also worth noting that women, knowledge workers, and people in the older age groups tend to report higher wellbeing. So there's a reminder of what are the things we can do for people who don't fit those criteria. High wellbeing related to increased effort and commitment in workplace settings. So there's a benefit to organisations who are looking for ways to support and foster wellbeing in their workforce. And feeling included by your leader and also having a growth mindset contributes or correlates with higher levels of wellbeing. So leadership and the mindset we have play a part in how we might experience wellbeing in the workplace. Now, many of you will be aware that we also do lots of research in the area of personality. And so one of the starting points when I looked at this wellbeing research back in 2016 came from a question: are there certain personalities or personality types that are happier than others? And prior to this research, I used to only be able to respond with, we don't know. So we've taken a well known and well understood framework and theory of personality measured by the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI. And over the last 6 years, we've regularly examined and investigated, are there any connections between personality type and well-being? Many of you, I'm sure, on our session today are very familiar with the MBTI model. For those who may not have seen it before, the MBTI assessment measures people's personality preferences on 4 pairs of preferences. And when you put those preferences into all their possible combinations, we end up with 16 broad personality types. So what did we find out in our research? Well, in 2021, people who completed our wellbeing study and who had completed or measured their personality through the MBTI, we looked at the overall or average scores for people of each of the 16 personality types measured by the MBTI. Now you can see here on the screen, there are some slight differences, but overall, the majority of the 16 personality types are falling in that wellbeing range of above 6, somewhere between 6 and 8. When we look at individual types, those with preferences for ESTJ on average reported the highest level of wellbeing in 2021. And out of the 16 types, those with preferences for INTP reported on average the lowest level of wellbeing. Now, of course, it's not at the rock bottom level of low wellbeing for INTPs, but there is a meaningful difference in wellbeing experience, say, between the ESTJs and the INTPs. So how does that compare to previous years? Well, the good news is we've got a previous 5 years of research on people's personality and wellbeing, and the patterns, a few patterns keep emerging here for us. First of all, the range in which wellbeing falls over the 2016 to 2020 is fairly similar even to 2021, but there were some different outcomes. First of all the types to the right of the dotted line are those with a preference for extroversion. And what we've consistently seen is those who prefer extroversion consistently report their well-being to be slightly higher than those to the left of the dotted line, which are the types who prefer introversion. Does that mean all extroverts are happier than introverts? There's no clear answer to that other than extroverts report experiencing high levels of well-being as measured through our model. But the introverts are also experiencing positive well-being, but may not express it in the same way as the extroverts. So there's more work to be done on that. When we started looking at which types over the 4 years on average consistently reported the higher or lower end, you can see the types that kept coming up towards the top, the highest levels of wellbeing were the ESTJs and ENFJs. What they have in common is the extroversion and judging preferences, so there may be something going on there. And the type that consistently reported towards the lower end of well-being were the ISTP types. Again, not at a rock bottom level of well-being, but noticeably lower than the ESTJs and ENFJs. What are the reasons behind that? It could be just different perceptions of well-being that people have, or genuine differences in their well-being. When we actually looked at the different factors of well-being and what did that look like across the 16 personality types, starting with positive emotions, which is the red line, you can actually see that it's fairly similar between extroverts and introverts, although extroverts report with a slightly higher frequency of positive emotions. And that might be one of the reasons that accounts for why extroverted types tend to report higher well-being. The blue line represents where the 16 types rated relationships, and you can see it came out consistently high, a high element out of all the well-being factors. Then we get into engagement, which sits a bit lower, but very similar for all 16 types. When we look at meaning, again, that sat very similarly to the importance of relationships in the workplace. And finally, when we looked at accomplishment, that was an area that sat somewhat lower out of the 6 elements. The good news is negative emotions sat in the lower range, which is what we would want and hope in terms of supporting well-being. But you can even see the trend that's starting to come through there for the introverted types at the left end of the scale. They were experiencing or tended to report a slightly higher frequency of negative emotions than the extroverts. So that again raises the question, is there more we can learn or explore to see how that might affect well-being for extroverts and introverts? So what's a broad summary picture so far out of that well-being research for personality? Those who have a preference for extroversion report slightly higher well-being than those with the preference for introversion. And what we did find is there are other studies now starting to look at personality and well-being, and measures that measure something similar to extroversion seem to have a very consistent finding. The more extroverted people are, the more likely that they're going to report more positive experiences of well-being and emotion. But what really struck us is we did some research asking people from a range of different activities, which activities do you use and which are the most effective for your well-being? And what really struck us is all of the 16 personality types have effective ways of supporting their well-being, but the activities differ between the types. So how do people actually go about enhancing their well-being? Well, from the years of research that we've been doing on this, we went back and asked people of different personality types from a wide range of activities, both inside work and outside of work, which are the most effective for you. So we've actually prepared a summary of those findings. And again, this is going to be one of the resources that we'll be sharing with everyone who's part of our webinar today. And we've summarized the top tips based on personality type, the kind of activities that each of the personality types reported was effective for supporting their well-being. For those in organizational support and well-being roles, it's probably worth noting that there is no one size fits all. So this could be useful for those planning well-being initiatives in their organization to actually consider that there needs to be a wide range of well-being offerings in order for it to meet different personality needs. And again, we've got more to say about that in the article and research that we'll share with you all after the session. So bring it back to ourselves. Well-being for all of us, I'm hoping everyone's seeing today, is important for all of us at work. So maybe think about what is one thing you can do at work to enhance your well-being. Now, when I say at work, it means when you're in a work mode. You may not be physically in a work office space. it might be working from home, but what is something that any one of us could do that will support our well-being? And what is something that you can do outside of work or when you're not in your work role that also supports your well-being? Now, these were questions that we did in fact ask over the last few years, and we divided a range of activities that are work-based and outside of work-based. Here's what the top 5 work activities people said supported their well-being regardless of what their personality type was. And some of this isn't really rocket science, but hopefully it reinforces for everyone what are some very easy or straightforward ways of boosting well-being at work. First of all, people said focusing on a work task or an activity that had interest for them supported their well-being, or focusing on a work task that led to feelings of positivity was important. Taking on a work activity where you are learning something new was found to be really important for well-being, and probably actually links back to that growth mindset we were talking about earlier. Having autonomy to take a break when needed was important, and also taking on challenging work that added to people's skills and knowledge was also reported as an effective way of supporting well-being. So have a think about one of those 5 areas or activities, things that you could tap into as part of your work. When it came to activities outside of work, and again, there were a wide range of options, everything from yoga to playing video games. What we found is the top 5 consistently came through as spending time with family and friends, listening to or playing music, reading, focusing on positives, and that linked very much to being grateful for what people viewed as things to cherish in their life, family, a place to live, good friendships. And the 5th one was opportunities to exercise, play sport, or go for walks. I can safely say number 5, going for walks, is something that I've really made part of my daily routine as part of working in a hybrid or remote way in the last 18 months. So not rocket science, but again, maybe have a think about, is there something in the activities outside of work that could be a benefit for your well-being? And for those who are more interested in looking at well-being from an organizational perspective, here are 3 things that you can consider doing if you're not already in your organization. So first of all, get a good measure and evaluate well-being of the people in your organization. As I mentioned, we now have a measure that can help get an objective way of looking at people's well-being and also comparing it to other groups and samples. Having measured the well-being of your organization, identify and implement the strategies that are going to be relevant for people in your organization. And that includes not only communicating those strategies, but working out which ones are the most relevant and effective for the range of needs of people that you have in the organization. I've had some people say to me they've tried to institute well-being initiatives in their organization, such as yoga classes or mindfulness, only to be disappointed that only a handful of people turn up to those kind of activities. So keep in mind, from our personality research, there were a range of activities that people use. And finally, as an organization, you want to evaluate what's the benefit or the impact of those well-being strategies. And what we're finding is re-evaluating well-being after about 12 months using the same measure is an effective way of measuring that impact. So if anyone has any questions about that or would like to explore that further, please let us know. So just to bring it into a close, what have we been working through today? First of all, that our well-being comprises multiple elements, and we've captured it in the Preeman model of well-being. 2021 has seen a decline in well-being, so if that's something you've personally experienced, you're not alone. It remains to be seen if that will change going into 2022, and we will be researching in 2022. Well-being is affected by our age, the location we live in, the job, type and also our personality type. Having inclusive leaders and a growth mindset supports well-being. And also we've identified a range of ways based on our research that are effective for supporting well-being. And this is an area that we're going to continue researching. So we'd love to get your thoughts, and indeed those who are interested in participating, keep an eye out for our future research initiatives on well-being. So I'm hoping that's given everyone some update on where we're seeing well-being in the workplace, and also some things that might be helpful for you to consider individually or indeed with your colleagues at work. So I might hand over to Kat now to take us through some next steps.
Great, thanks, Martin. And several of you have submitted questions already. Thanks for that. We do want to address your questions, so please feel free to submit those through the questions box. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to quickly share a few resources available on our website. The first is we do have a webpage focused on workplace well-being, and the link is shown on the page here. But on the Wellbeing webpage, you'll find some ideas for how to help employees increase their well-being, including a free downloadable guide for how to start a well-being conversation with a coworker or an employee. So give some tips on that. Martin referenced the value of personality insights as well in addressing well-being. So I'll just quickly share a few of our solutions that leverage the Myers-Briggs type indicator and those insights, which are highlighted on our website as well. One option is to become accredited in the MBTI, which will qualify you to assess personality differences and provide practical tools to improve communication, reduce conflict, manage stress, and help your teams across your organization to work better together. Our virtual MBTI certification course runs regularly in a couple different time zones, and it's been booking up pretty quickly. I've highlighted our remaining 2021 programs on the screen here. And I do want to note, we've got one in November. We have 2 virtual programs in early December, one that's going to be delivered in English and the other in Cantonese. And for any of our programs, feel free to reach out to our team with questions or visit our website to enroll. And if the public program dates don't work for you and you do have a group of people in your organization who want this training, we can run in-house, whether that's virtual or in person, government restrictions allowing, certification programs on your preferred dates and in your time zone. So just let us know if you have questions on that. Another option to explore is our virtual workshops that are facilitated by expert consultants like Martin. So this is a great way to bring MBTI insights to your leaders and teams with focused applications that can lead to lasting behavioral change. As Martin mentioned, feeling included and having inclusive leaders can support employee well-being. And one of our virtual courses is the Inclusive Leadership Workshop, which encompasses 3 modules that can be delivered in one day or in bite-sized chunks across multiple days. During these workshops, leaders will gain an understanding about diversity of thought and work through the core competency model pictured on the screen here that Martin reviewed earlier as well, for practicing inclusion in order to build their own self-awareness and leverage diversity in their teams. Martin also mentioned how positive relationships at work can boost well-being, and we do have short, focused virtual team development workshops that can keep your employees engaged through personality insights and practical application. So during these workshops, each participant receives group feedback on their personality type so that they can understand and appreciate differences in others. There are additional team workshop modules included or that we can include on our most popular MBTI type applications, such as enhancing communication, managing change, and building resilience. And I do want to add that while we've designed these to be virtual offerings, they can be delivered in person as well. And again, of course, as government restrictions allow. And finally, we do understand that each team is made up of a diverse group of individuals, and therefore the strengths and the challenges of each team can be unique. So if you do need support with tackling the specific needs of your teams, we can discuss options for customized development programs. So do contact us if you want to schedule a free consultation with Martin or another one of our experts. And I know we are right up on the time here, and quite a few really great questions have come through. I think what I'll do is just address the one common one, which is, will we get the slides from today? And we will be following up with all attendees, as Martin has mentioned a couple times, to provide the workplace well-being research, the well-being tip sheet, and also the recording of today's session, as well as a notes pack. So keep your eye on your emails for that. It should arrive in your inbox in the next couple of business days. And again, I do know that we're against the time right now. So for those of you that have asked questions, and of course there were a lot of really good ones that came through, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually to address those questions. And if you think of any question later, please also feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to connect with you. So I'll end it there just so we're on time. And thank you so much, Martin, for your presentation, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Kat, and thanks everyone for joining.